A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
Welcome, everybody. David Churchill is an associate professor of computer science at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. In 2016, he completed his PhD in computer science on artificial intelligence for Starcraft, and we'll be talking about Starcraft a whole lot today. And he's researching AI in computer games ever since. His main research focus is AI for real-time strategy games such as Starcraft. Since 2011, he's organized and ran the, is that AIIDE?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. What does that stand for? Just so everybody knows.
Artificial Intelligence in Interactive Digital Entertainment. So AIIDE.org. You can look it up. I'm not sure.
Excellent. So the AIIDE Starcraft AI competition. The competition puts state-of-the-art real-time strategy artificial intelligence research on display in the form of bots, which play the full game of Starcraft Brood War. In addition to organizing the tournament, he's also the author of Alberta Bot. So I'm assuming you did this when you were at University of Alberta?
Yep. During my PhD.
Awesome. Which has been competing since 2010 and won the competition in 2013. David, are you still competing?
My bot is sort of in a frozen state of development. So since 2015, the strategic elements of my bot haven't been updated. I just leave it in the competition as a benchmark. So it goes lower and lower and lower every year in the rankings, meaning that people get stronger and stronger.
Right. That makes sense.
Total sense. All right. Well, welcome, David. Welcome to the show. Yay! Help me out here. Yay!
I wish everyone was that excited to see me.
They are. They just don't communicate it well. All right, so essentially there's two things we want to chat about today. First of all, we contacted you because we were just fascinated by the idea of the first thing that we thought of when we thought about an AI game competition was how would cheating work and how would cheating prevention work if we're talking about non-human competitors. The second thing, which you brought up, which I think we really should have seen from the very beginning is any real-world implications of training AIs that can beat people in real-time military strategy games seems like something we should be concerned about. Okay, I thought we'd just start with explaining StarCraft itself. Right. So, Dave, what kind of game is StarCraft? What's a normal game of StarCraft like?
So StarCraft is a real-time strategy game. It's a genre that's kind of fallen off in popularity recently because I think it's kind of complex to play. People seem to go for more casual games these days, I guess. But the real-time strategy game genre, things like Command and Conquer, Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, StarCraft, they're type of games where you start off with a few units that typically like gather resources. So you have some worker units. They'll gather some minerals or gold depending on the game. They use those resources to build buildings. Then they use the buildings to build military units, and those military units try and kill the opponent. So either destroy their units or take over their territory or accomplish some arbitrary task. So usually when you're playing a game like this, you have like a top-down view. So you're this like sort of god that controls all the units, and I can like select all of my workers to go gather minerals, or select all of my marines to attack a particular target. So unlike a first-person shooter game or a MOBA game where like League of Legends, where you're controlling a single character, you can control up to hundreds of units in a real-time strategy game.
And the real-time part of it is that all of this is happening whether you're inputting anything or not. It's not waiting. It's not like a turn-based game. It's happening, and there's lots of little timing elements to it. Like if you need to keep track of the time of stuff, because if the clock runs out, then your units are just going to stand around for a little bit.
Exactly. So like, for example, you'd have something like Civilization, which would be a turn-based strategy game, or Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, which are turn-based. Like I take a turn, you take a turn, like chess. But as you said in StarCraft, it makes AI more difficult because if I'm sitting around making a decision instead of acting, you're just killing my units. So that introduces a real interesting time-based constraint, the real-time aspect of it, into the competition.
And how long is a game like this on, right? So it means you got to be super present, right? If you were a person, right? Obviously, an AI, I guess, also has to be super present in its own way, right? But how long are we talking about for a Starcraft competition?
So for the competition itself, that can run for as long as you want. So we actually run it for about 2 weeks of 24/7 games between all the AIs. But a single game of StarCraft typically lasts, when two humans play, between 3 or 4 minutes to an hour, depending on the strategy you use. So there's a bit of a rock, paper, scissors element to a real-time strategy game. The three main strategies you can use in a game like that are like, okay, I can attack really early, or I can put up defenses, or I can expand my economy, right? So if I've chosen to attack really early and you're not ready for that, then you're just going to die immediately. Typically in a human tournament setting, people don't go for those sorts of really fast, they call them cheese strategies because it's cheesy. Right. No one likes doing it or defending against it. So the duration of a single game completely depends on the strategy and the skill differential between the people.
Why is this good for an AI competition? Why StarCraft?
AI competition. Let's rewind a little bit. So this all comes back to like what the definition of intelligence might be. Not to give you too much of a philosophical or historical lesson, but whenever you are an academic, you need to be able to show that your thing that you produced, your research, is somehow better than the previous research. If it's not better in some way, meaning it's either more efficient, or it takes less time to run, or it solves a new problem, then no one really cares about it, right? You're getting public money to do this research. It should be better than what exists. And so when it comes to something like you're trying to design a machine to be intelligent, it's actually very difficult to have some sort of numerical measure for what intelligence is, right? If you just think and you try to come up with a definition for intelligence, it's difficult. Right? Is a tree intelligent? Is a monkey intelligent? Like it's a really deep philosophical question. So what AI researchers realized long ago was that that's almost impossible to answer. So what we'll do instead is we'll have these domains or environments like games, for example, and we can make a machine play that game. And if my machine beats your machine, then my machine is smarter within that domain. So this, like back in the 50s and the 60s, even like back that far, there were chess programs, right? So checkers and chess, that's where it all started. And so, through the years, machines have become superhuman at for example, tic-tac-toe. You could sit down very easily and write a tic-tac-toe program that's better than the best person in the world. Then came like checkers and chess. And then we had AlphaGo. So DeepMind, Google, they made AlphaGo, which people didn't think was ever going to happen in our lifetimes, but they surprised us all. And then after Go, people were sort of sitting around saying, okay, that was really the hardest board game that we had, right? There's nothing more complex than Go that is a reasonable game to play. Now you can make a game that has arbitrarily complex rules, right? But you can't make one that people have been playing for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Right.
So Go was the last board game. And then we said, well, what are we going to do now? Well, video games are pretty cool, right? So then we went into, okay, maybe there's video games that we can play. And so from our point of view, the research group that sort of was in at the ground floor of the real-time strategy game stuff at the University of Alberta back in 2006, 2007. They just said, well, why not go for the hardest video game? We don't want to do this incremental stuff. Let's just jump into the most complex thing that a human being can do, which is play StarCraft. It really is like playing chess while playing soccer. Imagine playing chess, but if I move my pieces faster and more accurately, then I have an advantage.
So there's a big difference already. All these other games are turn-based, right?
Yes.
So now we're doing strategy, but it's not turn-based. It's real-time, hence the analogy to playing soccer and chess at the same time.
Right.
So it depends on how technical you want me to go, but I could explain all of the differences. But essentially, the cool thing is that real-time strategy games are, like you said, they're real-time. They involve randomness. They involve hidden information. So I can't see your units unless I'm willing to sacrifice some of my units to go see them. They're multiplayer. They have gigantic state spaces, meaning that the number of possible Starcraft games, if you had a supercomputer inside every atom in the universe, you couldn't possibly enumerate them all, right? So it has a lot of properties which actually are very similar to the real world. So in all of our funding applications, we always say stuff like, well, if we have a good algorithm for playing StarCraft, well, this can be applied to many real world problems as well, because it's just as complex as any other problem we would actually face in our day-to-day lives.
One final question, I think, before we get to the rules. Can you play, is this the sort of thing where you can build alliances with people? Is this a play is every AI playing separately, or can they play as teams? How does that part go?
So within the game of StarCraft, there's many different modes that you can play, right? So you can play like the single player campaign. You can play 1 versus 1. You can team up and play 2 versus 2. You can have 8 people all fighting against each other for like a last man standing sort of free for all. But what we have done with the competition is model the most interesting form of human play. So if you look at human tournaments, and StarCraft has been a professional esport since like 1999, we said, okay, let's look at what the humans, the expert humans, think is interesting. Because, you know, I can look at a game of StarCraft and appreciate it. I can play decently, but like at a maybe medium amateur level. So we're deferring to the experts in this. And the experts have said that like there's one super interesting form of StarCraft for which the game has been designed and balanced, and that is 1 versus 1. So I control one set of units, you control another set of units, and we battle. And as soon as you start going to like team-based or free-for-all, you can have all sorts of things. Like if you have 3 players in a free-for-all, then you can have a kingmaker, right? So these kingmaker type games, like who's ever played Monopoly and your friend wants to go because it's taking 5 hours and they just give all their money to their friend, and you're like, that's bullshit, right? Sorry, I didn't know if I can swear or not. But like that sort of thing can happen where I'm playing well, but then I get teamed up on, right? So intelligence and stuff kind of goes out the window when you have environments like that. So we're saying, okay, it's me versus you. Let's see who's the best. And so that's what the competition is modeled on. It's 1 versus 1 StarCraft.
Right. So just as a little side note, the single player game is already you playing versus an AI, the AI that StarCraft has built into their, you know, the Blizzard has built into the game to fight you with. And I'm assuming that all of these AIs that we're talking about in these tournaments can completely destroy the regular AI that is built into the game.
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting topic. I could talk about any of these topics for a long time, but so we're venturing from academic AI into sort of what's industry game AI, right? So industry game AI has a very specific goal, which is to help your game sell copies, right? So the goal of an industry AI is within a time period and within a very limited budget and a very limited computational restraint, make it do something that's good enough that makes our game marketable, right?
Right. And it's also got a secondary goal, which is to make the game fun for the player.
Well, that's the secondary goal of being marketable, is that it's fun now, right? So whatever helps the company make more money is what they want the AI system to do, typically. And so within that context, the AI for StarCraft is just fine, right? It's a rule-based, goal-based AI that might say, like, if I see this person doing this thing, then I'll do this thing. Or they may, like the original StarCraft had 2 or 3 strategies per race that you can play in the game, and it just picked one of those and executed it from start to finish, right? So it was good enough so that if I'm playing the single player, it puts up a little bit of a fight. Now, the harder difficulties in the game actually cheat. We can get into that later. They do things like get more minerals from the same actions that you get. So the in-game AI can actually cheat. But yeah, one of the benchmarks that we have for our competition-based AIs is sort of, if you can't beat the AI that Blizzard already has in, there's no point for you to even enter this competition.
Right.
So the bottom performing bots in our competition have a 100% win rate against the built-in AI system.
Right.
But that's not to say that like the built-in AI system is bad. It was built with a different goal in mind.
Right. It's doing a different thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get to the cheating part, right? So let's say I'm a fiercely competitive programmer, right? I want to get the edge over the competition, right? What kind of things can I do that might be considered either cheating or potentially cheating or morally debatable? Let's say before you guys put any safeguards in, because I'm assuming there's something about a competition like this that allows for specific forms of cheating using AI that you guys had to put some sort of safeguards on.
Yeah, so this has been a topic of debate, right? And different competitions will have different opinions on this. So to give a little background on how AIs might be able to cheat, you have to know a little bit about the game engine itself. So not going to go into technical details, but essentially, when you're playing the game of Starcraft, you're clicking with the keyboard, you're selecting things with a mouse, and you're doing that at like human level speeds, right? And expert humans their actions per minute, APM, is actually a measure of skill at these type of games. So professional StarCraft players typically have between 300 and 500 APM, or actions per minute, which is like 10 actions per second.
That's insane. Right? How is that possible for a human to do that?
Just go... it's like Ender's Game, right? If you've ever read that book,
right.
That's who, like, all these StarCraft pros are like Ender, like they can see the matrix, right?
Okay.
So how can they do it? Years of practice,
right,
and like living in a basement and never, that sort of thing.
You would think at some point the hardware itself gets in the way. Like, how fast can you actually click a mouse?
Well, your hardware being your body,
right. But I mean, I'm talking about the physical input devices, like how you would think that a tenth of a second would be an awfully fast click speed, even for a fast mouse.
So modern hardware can handle human level input speeds. Let's just say that. Yeah. Now you can do little tricks where you like in the game, you can map the left click to the scroll wheel, and then you can scroll the scroll wheel, and that presses the button like 30 times a second. So you can do little tricks like that.
Lever.
But that's not really advantageous in StarCraft, but it is advantageous in some games like Overwatch, where you might need to click really fast. But that's beside the point. But essentially, all that was to say that the game was not designed with AIs playing it in mind. Okay? So the way that you enter an entry into this competition is that there is what's called an API, Application Programming Interface, which is just essentially a library of code that allows you to talk to the game, right? So when we say bots playing StarCraft, we don't mean a physical robot sitting down clicking keys, right? You write a program that has whatever intelligence you want inside it, whether that's if statements or machine learning or whatever. It can do things like say, where are all the units in the map? And you'll get back a data structure which has the XY coordinates of all the units in the map. And then based on that information, you say, okay, take this unit and click it here, take this unit and click it here. Now, this is where a philosophical debate began amongst the people organizing competitions. Because at the very beginning of all this, people thought that because computers are not limited in their input speed, they can click millions of times per second, trivially. And not only can they click fast, but perfectly precise, right? So I can click like at arbitrary precision, individual pixels on the map at superhuman speeds. Like I can issue a command to every single unit that I control on every frame of the 60 frames per second game with little to no computational cost, right? And so that is obviously superhuman. And people thought that, well, with that ability, AIs will trivially defeat the world's best humans, right? But it turns out that even with that superhuman ability, the strategic decision-making of the AIs is even still quite poor, to the point where the macro game, so just a little StarCraft terminology that I might use, macro means the large-scale economic game, a strategic game. Micro means the individual unit control. So people thought the micro capabilities of a computer would completely dominate humans, but it turns out that the decision-making, like not that you can click, but where you should click, is so much more important that we still don't have computers that can beat the world's best humans even a decade or more later.
Oh,
right.
That's fascinating.
So,
okay.
Yeah. And so back to your question about cheating, I know that was all really long-winded, but you had to understand.
No, that was great.
Is that
actually, Dave, can we pause it really quick and come back?
Sure.
So it's interesting. So that means, I wonder if we're moving up levels of complexity in games, right? Because in chess, it's all about the strategy. In Go, it's all about the strategy. So, and in Starcraft, it's still all about the strategy.
Well, no, you still need to be able to click, right? There is a level of complexity. And so it turns out that superhuman ability to click does give you an advantage, right? Like if a person with a human level of APM was playing at the same strategic level as a bot, the bot would crush them. But the bot is playing at a very low strategic level. And so this was a debate in the competition. Like, should we limit the input speed of the computer somehow? My opinion was, I don't think it's going to be an issue right away. So once bots get superhuman, then let's talk about limiting the input speed. But when DeepMind, they made AlphaStar, which is currently probably the world's best Starcraft AI. Took tens of millions of dollars to build that thing. What they did from the get-go was say, let's limit it to human input speeds. So their bot is limited to well within the realm of human actions per minute, but their bot does still have perfect precision of those inputs. So DeepMind and Google like to say, oh, we're playing with like human input speeds, but it's still perfectly precise. So it's still superhuman in its ability to input actions to the game.
But so from it seems to me like what might be happening is that because the AIs are not good about knowing what decisions to make, they're basically spending a lot of extra time that humans wouldn't, making tiny little finesse decisions about placements of certain units. Because they have all this extra speed, they can just do this, and they have this precision. For a human, you would just go, hey, grab all these guys, send them kind of over there.
That's exactly right. And if you watch AI games, you'll often see these like oscillating behaviors where instead of the units standing still, they're making little micro adjustments and stuff like that. But the interesting thing is that comes at no cost to the AI system.
But it would be extremely expensive to a human to do that.
Exactly. And so even though that's something that, AI systems quote unquote waste, it would be a waste if you limited your APM. But if we don't, then it is no waste, right? It's just the AI doing whatever it wants. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back now to the rules, to the potential cheating and the rules that potentially stop them.
So it turns out that with all of that in mind, that the game was not designed with these amounts of clicks in mind. And when the game was tested by the company, it was tested by humans. And so there are specific things that you can do to glitch out the game when you can click 1 million times per second. Huh. So for example, there's oftentimes, if you watch any sort of speed running videos where Super Mario clips through a wall or something like that, quote unquote cheating. That sort of stuff can happen in StarCraft as well if you time inputs of specific things perfectly, right? So for example, if the Terran buildings can be lifted up and down. And if you time it so that when you lower the building at the exact millisecond, you also press these 3 other inputs at the same time, then it turns out you can slide a building across the ground, and it's not supposed to be able to do that, right? Or you can cause certain units to be able to attack further than they were normally supposed to by issuing an attack command and then 1/60th of a second later stopping it and then issuing it again on another unit. And it has to do with the in-game animation system being a little bit buggy. And so in our rules, when we run the competition, we have a list of rules. And all the known bugs, let's say something that was not intended by the developer, we'll call that a bug, right? 99% of the bugs in the game are not allowed in our competition. And that is what we would consider cheating. There are some bugs in the game that have turned out to be very strategically advantageous that humans have allowed in their competitions. And actually, by mistake, made Starcraft the amazing game that it is. So we have kept those bugs in the game because it really makes the game more interesting. But the things that sort of humans have deemed off limits, we also have deemed off limits.
Interesting. So you guys decided the rules are whatever the community thinks makes for a good game.
Exactly. And that's what, I mean, whenever you talk about, I know you're the philosopher, whenever you talk about cheating is breaking a contract, right? Like, even if you're in a relationship, some people are in open relationships. So being with someone else wouldn't be cheating to those people, right? So literally you just write a contract, and if you break the contract, that is cheating. So that's how we consider it in the competition.
That seems very straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we got these exploits out of the way. Are there any other ways that someone might decide to get an advantage that doesn't involve essentially using these exploits that are against the rules?
Yeah, so based on the way that these APIs that I was talking about, the thing that actually lets you talk to StarCraft, for example, back in the early days of the competition, we had to decide, like, these games have to be played on hardware, right? Like, you have to have a machine somewhere that's running this game. Now, lately you can do all sorts of things in the cloud, but like, we started off in a computer lab at the University of Alberta. And we said, okay, well, the API allows us to play two AIs on the same computer. So why don't we just do that? We'll get one match per computer. But then it turned out that what if someone, because both AIs are running on the same machine, what if I just allocated all the memory on the machine? Right? In an attempt to steal resources from my opponent running on the same physical hardware.
It's like two people playing chess across the table and one of them hitting the other with a baseball bat.
Or taking all the oxygen out of them. or like holding their hands in front of their eyes, right? So the physical space can be tampered with. So what we did was we just said, okay, we're going to have one bot per machine, and then then they'll talk over the network, right? So you can have it run it locally over something that's called shared memory, or you can have it running on different machines and then, talk over the local area network, not over the internet, because that would be a little bit slow for the AIs, but like, this physical piece of cable that connects the two machines. So that was one thing that could happen. And we identified that very early and did some tests. Yep, we can crash the other bot if we want to, because these bots have to run with admin privileges. So I can literally say, shut down the process of the other bot, right?
That's so did people do that, by the way?
No, because we realized that early enough.
Okay.
But something that has eliminated all anxiety from an organizer's point of view with respect to cheating is that our competition is an open source competition. So we also just crowdsource the detection of cheating. So if there's any, and these people who enter the competition are pretty meticulous about looking at other people's bots and what they're doing. Like, if you get beaten and you're really competitive, you want to know, you go study the videotape. And imagine if you were playing, Go against another human and you could literally study their brain. Right? That's what's happening. You can see the source code of the other person.
Oh, that sounds like an amazing learning opportunity. My God. Yeah.
Oh, it is. And not only is it a learning opportunity, but like it created a really interesting community within the game as well. So some competitions are closed source. Some people don't want their secrets to be out there, and I understand that. Ours is an academic competition. So I could, it doesn't really matter to me how good StarCraft AI gets. It matters how good AI gets. StarCraft is just the environment to me, right? So what we did was we said, hey, the competition is open source. You can actually build the next year's version of your bot based on someone else's stuff, right? And that's what happens. So like I have, selfishly, I can talk about the family tree of bots that have come from UAlberta Bot. And there's like 20 of them.
That's amazing.
And they've been updated over the years. Yeah, it's probably the proudest thing that I have in my research career.
Right.
None of these publications.
Has anybody since all this code is open source, has anybody built a bot to basically search through the code of all the other bots to build a better bot for the next one?
The funny thing was, there was a bot that it didn't search through the code. It just took 10 other bots. So here's what it did. In the competition, like I said, we play for like 2 weeks. You play tens of thousands of games in this competition. And we're able to do that because, so when a human plays the game of StarCraft, it's running at 60 frames per second. The animations have 60 frames per second. What we do when we run the competition is say, remove that restriction. The bots don't need to see the screen. They're just reading the data. So the bots play at hundreds, if not thousands of frames per second.
Right. So
basically
these games go by
as
like
fast
that.
as it. Yeah. So a 5-minute game would be 10 seconds to a bot. Right. And so now.
That's amazing, by the way.
Yeah. So between games, you have learned something about your opponent. Like if me and you played 500 games of chess or poker, I would kind of get a feel for how you play. Right? If we played StarCraft, you even get more of a feel because I was like, okay, in the last 99 games we played, he built Marines at 3 minutes and 10 seconds, 99 times in a row. Maybe this time I should prepare for Marines at 3 minutes and 10 seconds.
So does that
right?
mean there's learning algorithms as part of the AIs?
Yes. So after a match, you can actually write your data. So anything you have learned during that match, you can record every action of the other person if you want. And then at the beginning of your next match, you can say, this was Dave's bot. And in the last game, I'm playing Dave again right now because the bots are named. So this is another decision. Whether or not bots should be named or anonymous, that's another rules thing. But we said, hey, in human games, you're playing against Dave. So we're going to make the competition emulate that. So you could say, okay, in previous games, the opponent has done this thing, so now I'm going to do this thing. So that gets back to what you said, where one bot put 10 bots together. So it literally had the source code of 10 different bots. And when it started its match, it could choose which bot it wanted to be.
Oh,
and so
clever.
It could say, hey, I used Dave's bot last time, and it lost to this guy. So I'm going to choose Joe's bot this time. And then over time, it would see which bot had the highest winning rate. And so it turned out that it didn't do that well because the learning was a bit slow and all that kind of stuff. But it was such a really cool thing to do.
Yeah. So you could just randomly, on one hand, it becomes unpredictable to the other bots. So that seems like an advantage. But on the other, and then the second advantage is it's like, I can actually track my own win-loss records based on which AI I'm actually using. That's fascinating.
Wow, that's I'm immediately thinking of when people talk about like Genghis Khan going against Napoleon or Alexander the Great, the kind of great generals of the past, and if you had an AI that could just pick the best competitor, the best mind versus this particular opponent every time, right? It seems like a huge advantage. Let me ask you about this. First of all, did you ever name your bot the University of Alberta bot? Did you ever give it a name?
It's just called Alberta bot.
No? Okay.
No, and it's, I'm at a different university now.
Right.
And I actually had the discussion, should I change the name? And I was like, nah, it's legacy now, so we'll just leave it
the son of Alberta bot.
Yes.
Right?
But it's kind of interesting that topic because when it comes to research, if you I've spent a lot of my professional life releasing tools for people like that bot, right? And you could have an amazing tool, but if you give it an uncatchy name, no one will use it. The second you give it a catchy name, a bunch of people use it. And so it's important to give it, if you gave your bot, if it was loser bot, even if it was the winning bot, less people would approach that repository of code because it's called loser bot, right? So,
but if they're using other AIs to determine which of these bots to use, then they would overcome that human bias, right?
Yeah.
If they use that particular learning algorithm. So let me ask you, with the open source, does this mean I can literally go and copy and paste, or the equivalent of copy and paste code from a competitor AI and just grab that code and now use it in my AI?
Yeah. So completely. So for example, like I said, there have been a couple of dozen bots over the years that have used my bot as the basis for their bot. And the reason for that is that when it comes to Starcraft AI, it's not just the decision making that's the problem. There's a huge software engineering problem as well. Like these bots are between 5 and 50,000 lines of code. It takes months, if not years, to build the architecture for the system. And so what I did with mine is I tried to make UAlberta bot, like at the beginning, yes, I was doing a PhD, I wanted to graduate, I wanted to be the best possible. But then after doing well in the competition, I said, okay, now my focus is shifting. I'm going to document this thing, make it as strategically agnostic as possible, and just make it the best possible tool for someone to use to implement their own bot. And so that's why it became popular, because it was one of the better documented bots out there. But like, for example, in terms of, what this podcast is all about, the only bots I have ever had to disqualify over the past few years, and I think there was 3 of them, other than not working. So we do a testing phase, and if your bot crashes half the time, we just disqualify it because it'll slow down the competition. But the only other ones we've ever disqualified is we do allow you to copy a bot, modify it, and then submit your new version. These people who were disqualified for not modifying it enough.
Okay, so
and
it's
unfortunately,
so it's not like you can completely copy and paste, right? There's still limitations.
No.
So what
Yes.
are those limitations?
So unfortunately, so I go through life trying to be as objective as possible. I want there to be a measure of whatever it is, right? Like opinion, everyone has an opinion sort of thing. Yeah. So when it comes to this is probably, other than the deciding on the rules, which is subjective, but informed, right? Based on human competitions. This is really the only rule that we have that is subjectively enforced. And it's sort of crowdsourced, but also, up to the dictator, who is myself. And essentially, what we want to see is some sort of tangible strategic change to what the bot does.
Okay.
And so one of the people had literally just copied and pasted the bot, given it a different name, and submitted it. It was line for line, character for character, the exact same bot of the other person.
Zero,
so we said,
zero
okay,
changes whatsoever.
0 changes. Another bot was 0.001% changes, where they took this parameter, which was the aggressiveness of the attacking strategy of another bot. So this other bot had something where it was like, not exactly this, but you can consider it this. At what time do I attack? Right? And he moved it forward 30 seconds. And that was their change. And we said, that's not a new bot, right? So let's not do that. And another person took a bot, said that they had implemented a new machine learning strategy selection, which would have been great. But when we looked at their code, the return value was always 0, which meant that it never actually used this system that they said it did.
Interesting.
And so it was like, good intentions,
Right.
but what their code actually did is not what they said it did.
Right. So,
and so
it
we
just did the same
okay,
thing
just
as the
keep
other
working on
AI.
it. Exactly. And so, I mean, it may have had, like I said, this minor change, but we want to see it do something different, right? Because someone else worked for 2 years on this thing, and now you're going to change one line of code and call it your submission. We want, and unfortunately, like I said, that's the only subjective thing we've really ever had to do. And I felt really bad about it because I want everyone to be able to compete. But at the same time, if people are allowed to just literally copy and paste the files and submit them and call it their own, that's not something that other people in the competition are going to be discouraged if you allow that, because now you're allowing other people to take credit for your work. So even though it is open source, there should be attribution and there should be all these other things as well.
Right. So, and you guys decided, not to focus on the percentage of the code that is unique, but on you're doing something strategically different, strategically new. So who gets to decide if it's sufficiently original?
Me.
Okay.
but I go on our Discord server and I say, hey, everyone, these are the changes we saw in this bot. Right. And luckily what I do is I run the competition in a way such that so the competition structure isn't like, it's not like a 32 person knockout tournament.
Okay.
Right. It's a bunch of round robins.
Okay.
So every bot will play every other bot on map 1, then on map 2, map 3, up to map 10, and then the process repeats for however long we have.
Okay.
So the good thing about that is that after the fact, and one of these bots actually competed in the competition, but after the fact, we noticed it had the exact same stats as another bot.
Oh.
Right? And so we looked at it then, because I don't have time to look at the entire source code beforehand. And I saw that it was the same bot. And so luckily, because of how we run the competition, I could actually just go back and remove all the games that this bot played and then use the results of everyone else playing against everyone else. And so I didn't have to rerun the entire competition.
Got it. Now, it's interesting that they would have exactly the same statistical outcomes for
within 2%.
Okay.
Right?
Because
when you see like...
But that means you had mentioned that at the very beginning that StarCraft has an element of chance to it, that there's some random elements to it. But what that means is that those random elements of chance become very, very small.
At 10,000 games.
They are...
Right.
So, yeah, the random chance in StarCraft is so minor. It's things like where your bot was placed on the map. Right? So if there's a map where there's 4 players possible, there are 4 starting locations. At the start of the game, your bot is placed in the bottom left, my bot is placed in the bottom right. Now, if our bots are similarly strong, it doesn't matter where we're placed, you're still going to beat me. Or sorry, if your bot is better than mine, it doesn't really matter where we're placed. Right? So those randomized elements are small enough that they're not like poker where you got dealt pocket aces 5 hands in a row, right? It's the placement of the initial units and very minor things in the game. Like if you're shooting up a hill, you have a 5% chance of that shot not landing. Like it's not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not deciding the outcome of the game.
I want to go back to, you mentioned there was a debate about whether or not to give these bots names. Why not? Why not call them all, Dave, Sarah?
So this is the thing. If we've been running the competition for 10 years now, and for example, my bot hasn't been updated, 10 years, 12 years. My bot hasn't been updated since 2015. So in your bot, if you've been playing for the last 7 years, you know exactly how to beat UAlbertabot, right? You know it's going to do this thing, you know it's going to do that thing. So you say, if the opponent's name is UAlbertabot, then do this strategy. And so there are some sort of, that's one example. My bot is not super exploitable, but there are bots that are like one-trick ponies. Like this bot for the last 3 years has done a Zergling rush at exactly 4 minutes. Right? Now, if that bot was named bot 004, it would have a much better chance of winning if it was named like Dave's Zergling rush bot that has competed for the last 6 years. Right? So some people believe that, in the true spirit of AI, which is not knowing what to expect, we should not be showing the names of the agents.
Right. Okay. So the bots would fight each other blind.
Exactly. Now, however, you would learn over time because we would keep the same name. So you'd be bot XYZ, but you'd be bot XYZ for the entire competition. It's just that you would not be exploitable in the way that like some bots literally have a book of other bots' strategies that they look up at the start.
Right.
And if this is Shlomo bot, we know he's going to expand at 4 minutes, therefore we'll attack him at 3 minutes and 50 seconds. So that's the debate. And what I suggested was that I'm going to go based on what humans do. And in human competitions, that you're going to be playing against Jaedong, right? One of the best players of all time. And that person is very strong with this particular unit type. And if that person doesn't want to be exploited, they should get better at the game, right? So if you're entering your same one-trick pony 4 years in a row, go cry to someone else because someone knew what you were going to do, right? So that's a complete, that's up to the benevolent dictator of the competition to say, whether or not things should be named.
So on the flip side of that, then if I enter a bot 1 year, and with a certain name, and then I bring it back the next year, and I've updated it. I've spent a year working on it, and so it's a different bot. Do you require that I name it differently, or does it, or is it even the same bot?
So what we do is there is a registration period where you register that you are going to compete in the competition. That registration period ends a month before the submission deadline of the competition. So you know who is going to be competing in the competition a month before you submit your bot. So if Dave Churchill has worked on his bot for the last year and called it something different, in the registration sheet, you see Dave Churchill under the name, but then the bot name could be UAlbertaBot 7.0 or ChurchillBot or whatever, but you see, that's Dave. I know his tricks, right? So we have had that happen in the past where like, oh, that's someone else's bot, but they're playing Protoss instead of Terran now. So people are like, oh, I wonder what they're doing. It was really strong last time. And there's all sorts of discussions and cool community that forms around that.
That sounds like something that would be a meaty bit of data to bite into.
Yeah, so this is all about this is just the metagame of the competition, right? It's the game outside the game. And some people argue that shouldn't exist for AI competitions. Some people argue that it should, and we're still just modeling like what humans do sort of thing. So
okay, let's go bigger now, right? Let's kind of look at the bigger picture here, right? One way to describe what you guys are doing, I mean, is that obviously it sounds really fun. It sounds that this is a great way to learn a lot about how to create AIs. But another way to kind of look at it is that you're helping to create AIs with enhanced strategic capacities to destroy their enemies. And, it's one thing if they apply that to their enemies in Starcraft, but maybe that technology is transferable to any situation and any enemy. Are we at the point where we need to be careful with AIs getting this sort of skill?
So just to let you know, we have had a workshop, which is the strategy game workshop at AIIDE every year, sort of a side conference thing. And we have U.S. military people showing up to those workshops.
Sure.
Right? Now, the people who show up aren't like the generals, sort of like, cloak and dagger type of thing. These are people just like me, who are just nerds who like strategy games. And of course, they have, they're being funded by the military to take what they learn and possibly apply it to blowing up people somewhere. Now, this is the philosophical question, is that with great power comes great responsibility, right? So should the maker of the tool be morally responsible for how that tool ends up being used? Like you can, knives can stab people. Should the knife maker be horrified when stabbings occur, right? Now, of course, this moral debate, I know you've probably visited this before, right? When it comes to things like guns,
right.
Well, guns have one purpose.
Right.
It's not to eat mashed potatoes. It's to kill things, right? So yes, maybe the gun manufacturer, I'm not getting into political debates here, but you can see what I'm saying,
yes.
Right? Our purpose with using this video game as a test bed is that it has very interesting properties that make it hard for the AI to do well. And so, yes, this competition, the AIs could be used, instead of controlling a video game tank, they could be used to control a real world tank. Now, God help whoever puts that in their real tank, because based on the AIs we've seen in the competition so far, you're not going to be winning any wars, right? So
far.
But what I do know that is happening, what I can say, is that these techniques have been borrowed and modified and used to simulate battlefield outcomes and inform the decision-making of humans. And from what I have been told from people who have showed up to these workshops, and I'm not under any sort of NDA, but I won't name names, is that old military commanders hate computers and are like, don't trust them at all. So they are willing to look at the outcomes of simulations, but they absolutely don't want the computers making the decisions.
Right.
Right. And I mean, with that that topic comes a bunch of other crazy stuff like, do you want the AI being, since the beginning of fighter jets have had automatic target tracking systems. Right. But do you want the jet pulling the trigger? Right. So, but is an automatic target tracking system a morally bad thing to create because it can be used, like it could also be used to read postal codes on an envelope at the post office. Right? Like this sort of image processing techniques, like they're all the same technique, they're just used in different scenarios.
And arguably you would think that a very good AI simulation of a battle would be used largely to save lives, as a protective sort of way. Like,
well, with the caveat that I'm not a military person.
Sure.
I think sometimes, the military commander is really only concerned with saving the lives of their own troops. Right? More efficiently taking the lives of others is what they're also about. So, yeah, you've seen, like, with the war in Ukraine, how effective these drone strikes are.
Yeah.
That's all technology. Now, some people might say that those drones have been fighting for a good power. You talk to the other side, those drones are fighting for an evil power.
Right. But this sort of AI would be really, really good for controlling a drone swarm.
Swarm.
Oh, completely.
Right? And coordinating different aspects on the battlefield extremely tightly in ways that you would think humans would not be able to do.
But at the same time, doing the exact same thing for search and rescue. Right. So like when I did my master's was in robotics, and part of when I got funding for my PhD, my literal application, my document that I wrote, my research proposal was taking the stuff that I had done on the ground, which was like vision-based navigation, and applying it to aerial drones. And at the time, the big thing was Hurricane Katrina, looking for survivors, things like that.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, now I didn't end up doing that, but that was the research proposal. I ended up, I started off doing something like that. And then someone said, hey, do you want to work on Starcraft? And I said, screw helping people. I want to play video games, But that was, I'm a huge video game nerd. So
sure.
Do what you like. You won't work a day in your life, sort of thing. So I'm not upset about that decision. But the thing is, yes, we can sit around and say we're teaching robots to kill each other, but we're also teaching robots to, it's just an advancement of a technology, right? This is not a nuclear weapon where its only possible purpose is to destroy a world, right? So it's an interesting moral dilemma. And as a self-proclaimed semi-moral being, like, for example, I would never intentionally work in the field of facial recognition because I personally believe that there is no morally just use of the technology of facial recognition, because I think it is always ends up being used for, like, sure, you can unlock your phone, you can save half a second in your busy day, but you can also have China tracking Uyghur Muslims with facial recognition, right? So like certain areas I won't touch. Robots killing each other, it just happens to slip by my moral radar. I don't know. Like it's like I don't know if it's kind of, maybe I'm a hypocrite for that, but these technologies can be used for a lot of good, unlike some technologies which I think are just pure evil. So, but that's just a judgment call. I don't know.
So I know this is sort of outside of your specific field of AI, but in the news recently, there's been talk about this AI, the chat AIs that have become very, very good at simulating conversation. And I guess a Google employee has suggested that one of the AIs that they were working on to do this for basically simulating human chat, has developed sentience. It has claimed to have developed sentience, or so they say. Do you want to weigh in on that? I mean, I know it's not exactly your field, but it must come in conversation, and you must be talking about it.
I think that if you talk to any reasonable academic AI researcher, any claims of the singularity or sentience are just like, like it's a headline, right? People love a good headline. And I do not know the qualifications of that person at Google. Let's just put that out there. I've seen the picture that the media has represented this person with that makes him look kind of crazy, which I don't like. You know, he's just like sitting there with a top hat and all. It's weird. But I don't know that person at all. I don't know their level of expertise. I'd never heard of that person. But generally speaking, unless, and now Google does have way better AI tech than I have, right? It could be true, but I seriously doubt it. And anyone I speak to on a regular basis doing fundamental algorithmic AI research will say, yeah, that like the chatbot is really good. It might be able to pass a Turing test, right? Where you don't know that you're talking to a person or a chatbot. It's really, really good at that. But what in the hell is sentience? Has it, like, if you ask a computer, are you sentient? Do you know you're alive? And it says yes, it's yeah, because it was trained on data that said that somewhere, right? Like it doesn't, but I mean, maybe that's what I am.
Right.
I'm just electricity, right? So what, I try not to get involved with sentience because I don't know what that means. Is a tree sentient? Like,
that's probably wise.
Maybe there's some biological definition, but like, yeah, I think that most people kind of, you know, who are in the field shrug off those claims of like super scary thing. Now, it can be really scary because it could be used, like, for example, let's take something that's evil, but not world-destroying evil, like call centers. Let's say a call center employed millions of that AI to just annoy us till the end of time, right? That's a scary application of that technology. But like whether or not it's sentient, it still has a plug in the wall that you can pull out, right? people always go to the Skynet thing, but like, you know, there was a robot who escaped its cage one time because it unlocked the door. But like it had been trained to do that. Don't train your robot to do that. You know, like it's I don't know. I don't think we should be scared of what people can do with AI, not what an AI will do it by itself.
Right. Sure. Absolutely.
And yet I still have very much the idea that we're still in our infancy when it comes to how good these AIs are. And it seems that there's just so much of an advantage to AIs, to the coordination aspects and the speed, the decision-making speed aspect of AIs that it's so easy to see in the future countries turning over their armies to AIs thinking, well, I can always pull the plug, right? Assuming that there is a plug, right?
And I think it's useful to talk about, when we talk about AIs making decisions quicker than humans can really adjust to, is talk about the stock market and how AIs are being used to make trades on the stock market.
Dave, is there any point where you would be like, okay, now I'm actually concerned that we are getting to territory that might that might lead to some scary military consequences? Is there some sort of line? I mean, you've got this principle, and the principle is essentially looking to see if the technology really has, is flexible enough to have positive applications, and some technology doesn't. But do you have essentially some sort of things that would raise red flags for you?
Well, so I already mentioned something. Let me not mention specific countries anymore. I don't know.
All right.
How you or your podcast is politically affiliated, but like
we're not.
There are academic publications from organizations that are nationally aligned with some political parties, and those publications are things like identifying the race of someone from their photo or from a sound file, right? Also, there have been things that showed that like certain facial structures are indicators of gender identity, right? So what good could possibly come of that? None, right? There is no situation in which a government would want to identify a minority that could possibly be a good one, in my opinion. And we have seen in recent years that even though we like to think that like World War II era persecution of minorities has stopped. It absolutely hasn't. And we continue to be the largest trading partners of those countries doing those things. So everyone loves to say, oh, I would have never been a Nazi, or I would have fought against Germany in World War II. I would have never been a part of that, while they are currently collaborating with people doing the exact same thing, literally identifying people with AI and putting them in physical concentration camps. So not only am I scared of what could happen, it's currently happening.
And we're not scared enough.
We're not scared enough to lose $1 or a citation.
Right. Yeah.
So,
very little has been done about the Uyghurs. Yeah.
So, I mean, and I have people that I publicly boycotted a conference that I have taken part in for the last decade this year because it was held in Beijing at an institute that has done some of these publications. And I said, I'm not going to be a part of that. I'm not going to be a part of something that takes money from those people. And one other person sort of joined me in boycotting that. And the rest were like, yeah, but I have a publication there. And, I was an invited speaker. Okay, if you can sleep with that, or if you don't care. Now, I also get the side of things where it's like me, Dave, the person in Newfoundland, me speaking up isn't going to change a goddamn thing. Right? Like the outcome, I'm only doing that so I can morally grandstand or say that I tried to make a change or something. But it's physically, tangibly in the world, me alone, I'm not going to make a change. So I can understand a colleague wanting to further their career when speaking up would tangibly do nothing other than just hurt their career. Right? So I get that. That is a moral gray area that is up for each individual to decide. Right? Like I was offered $5,000 to go speak at a company in China about Starcraft AI. I declined it. But if someone else just, here's $5,000, why wouldn't they? Me going there isn't going to advance the totalitarian regime, right?
Right.
I'm going to put something on my CV. I'm going to come home and it's going to be great. Why speak out if it's not going to make a difference? But that's not how I choose to operate.
Right.
So.
And of course, enough people speak out, it does make a difference.
Exactly, right? If everybody stopped, then they would stop.
Right.
Because they would have nobody to sell their stuff to unless they changed their, but everyone wants a cheap insert phone here, right? Like I paid $1,000 for my phone already. I don't want to pay $2,000. Who cares about little human rights abuses, right? So, but yeah, so back to the thing, AI is already doing scary stuff. And there are fields of AI that I have colleagues in, so I'm not going to really mention them, but I think they've already gone too far. And by too far, I don't mean like Skynet. I just mean that I don't see a tangible benefit to humanity to keep going in that direction. We've already reached the point with that technology that any good you can do with it can already be done. Mm. And I'm just scared that the better it gets at the thing that it does, the worst stuff it's going to be used for. Mm. Right? And so, for example, my research, you could say, Dave, you're a hypocrite because you're still doing research in Starcraft AI. Now, my answer to that is I agree. Right? The stuff I can be used if it keeps going. Like if I was able to reach the penultimate level of my research, yes, it could do something terrible. Right? So could any chemicals research. It could cure someone of AIDS, or it could be used to make a bomb.
Right. But it could also do something amazing.
It could. And so there's that thing where you try and advance. So there's two areas where you do research. One area of research is I want to advance a technique. Another area of research is I want to advance the applicability of a domain. Right? So that's the difference between I want to make my algorithms better versus I want to make the best Starcraft AI. And I'll do anything to make the Starcraft AI. I've given up on the Starcraft AI thing. I just want to make algorithms better. So for example, because Google and Tencent and all these huge companies have taken over Starcraft research, I've sort of pivoted my research to, instead of controlling in-game AI, what can AI do for the design process of video games? So for example, I'm doing something now where it's about video game testing. So if you made a video game and you want to find bugs in your video game, Don't employ 100 people. Use my AI system that can do 1,000,000 years of work in a day. And then some people are like, well, you're just taking 100 people's jobs.
They weren't good jobs.
So technology is like, that's what it does, right? It takes people's jobs. So I don't know. It's something I'm very conscious of. And what I try and do is advance techniques, but stay away from dangerous domains specifically.
We're going to wrap it up. Let me just ask you one final question, which is, what do you want to leave our listeners with?
The thing I want to leave people with is that AI and games, the combination of those two things, has been by far the most effective educational tool that I've ever come across. Because when you take something that someone does for fun in their spare time and make that the environment in which they learn, the engagement is through the roof. And people often overlook the educational benefits of AI in games. And so I think that's the most important thing to me. So that's what I want to leave you with.
All right. Dave Churchill, thank you very much for coming on our show. Yay! Play nice, everybody.
You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.